Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with printmaker and painter Panayiotis Terzis. Enjoy.
Michael.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's going on?
How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
What'd you work on today?
Today, I was working a little bit on some drawings for some new kind of small paintings, and I was trying to redraw some drawings of these faces that I'm always kind of drawing faces. So I was working on some working up these drawings into more finished drawings that I can then transfer onto some small canvases I got a hold of. And it's a very short studio day, and then I just decided to walk home to just kind of get some sun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How long have you been drawing these geometric faces?
I mean, honestly, probably like since I was in high school. I just remember compulsively drawing faces, and I don't know, I just have memories of just making these doodles and, seeing how I can put together a face with different shapes and sort of pushing the ridiculousness of it. I haven't really, it's not something I really have examined that much, but it's always been, I guess, kind of like an impulse. And at a certain point, I guess at different times I sort of gave into it and brought it into more intentional projects instead of just having it be this sort of doodle.
Yeah, and in high school, were you focused on art? I was always, there was a time when I wasn't sure if I was going to go more into writing or visual arts, but at a certain point, I guess I sort of, I took a studio art or art major. I can't remember what the class was called. I took a class that was kind of a general, kind of a serious, had a serious focused approach to developing a kind of a studio practice. And I was a bit of a mess, from ages, 15 to 17. And I remember there was a moment where I was working on this painting. We had to do these self-portraits, kind of Chuck Close style, take a photo and blow it up and divide it up into little, kind of break it up into a grid. I sort of had this moment of transcendence where I was trying to finish this painting, and you're supposed to work on it upside down, so you weren't focusing on you weren't focusing on the fact that it was your own face and worried about whether the likeness was coming together or not. And I kind of just forgot what I was doing and sort of lost myself in trying to capture these shapes, and it sort of saved me, I think. And because I didn't really have a lot of, I was sort of I was in a bit of a dark place at that point, and I think just realizing that could be an outlet, sort of I kind of refocused specifically on being a visual artist. I mean, I was always a creative kid. I was always drawing. Like when I was much younger, I was really into comics, and I was one of those kids that kind of learned how to draw by copying, by kind of redrawing, comics like Wolverine or Spawn or eventually the Max, when I was like 9, 10 years old, and eventually discovered underground comics. But I sort of put that aside for a while. You're sort of forming as a human, and you're trying to figure out, you're trying to be cool. You're trying to figure out how to present yourself to the world. And maybe you put aside these things that you did, maybe you're like, well, it's, drawing comics and photocopying them at my mom's office and selling them at school. Maybe you reach a certain point where like maybe that's not the thing to do, or you're trying to figure out. So you sort of put it aside. But I think that moment when I was working on that painting, I was able to rediscover that, the power of just sort of like losing yourself in that creative process. And so I switched over. I decided to fully go all in and focus on making images in one way or another. I had no idea. I didn't really have any model of what that meant, like what a career as an artist, would be. My parents aren't artists. I had no professional, artists in my family. So eventually I made my way to New York and ended up at art school. Kind of moved to New York at 19 to go to art school, and just kind of threw myself into it and sort of figured it out.
So was this in Greece?
No, actually. So I was born in Greece. My mother's American. My dad was Greek. And then my folks split up when I was 7. And we moved to the States. My mother and my 3 sisters, or my 2 sisters. My dad eventually had 2 other kids. So now I have 4 sisters, 2 sisters in Greece. But we moved to Connecticut. My mother was from Connecticut, so I sort of the second half of my childhood kind of grew up there. But we'd spend summers in Greece. We'd go over there, get shipped over there for a couple months every year.
That's cool.
Yeah, to stay with our dad.
What is your relationship to Greece? Is it important?
Yeah, I mean, moving to the States at that age, I think 7 is the age when you're sort of like the core of your personality is kind of formed, and all your sense impressions of the environment that you grow up in have made an imprint on you, right? And so and to me that was, especially in the summer, like long hot days, like a lot of unstructured time, because in Greece there's a very, it's just a lot. Time is different. Time just moves. It felt like there was a lot of time, and you'd have those in the afternoons. Everything, you have a late lunch, and then everyone sort of takes a nap. Things just sort of shut down from like 3 o'clock to 6 or 7 o'clock, and then people kind of slowly wake up and have coffee, and then you have a late dinner, and so if you're a kid growing up in that environment, you sort of have a lot of time where you're just on your own and you're kind of running wild. And we lived on the edge of the second city of Greece in the north called Thessaloniki, and we lived on the edge of the city, and just kind of beyond our block of kind of apartment blocks across the street was just sort of wilderness, and there were stray dogs, and there was we'd go for a walk, we'd go kind of explore and find turtles in the sort of this sort of wild area that was sort of like the edge of a big forest. And then moving to the States, it was sort of a culture shock, because everything felt very scheduled and sort of, I wasn't used to sort of being told what to do, and I was always kind of pushing against that. So, and my name, I never sort of anglicized my name, so I think I was always pegged as kind of like the foreign kid. So, and kind of going back every year, that sort of reinforced like that other half of my identity. So I've always sort of felt kind of split in two. That kind of duality, and be able to see both worlds from the outside, and like I can criticize both cultures. I can see the benefits of each, and kind of take what works for each of those, from each of those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing, right? Because it's evident that you are prolific and structured and professional. Right? Like you do a lot of work. You've worked at the Riso. Did you found the RisoLAB?
Yeah, I started it.
So like so you got both within you, and then you have a lot of colorful imagery. Mm-hmm. Do you still go back to Greece every year?
Yeah, almost every year. I mean, we're going this August. My wife's from Korea, so now we have a third country we need to
interesting
kind of split our time between. But
But yeah, I try to go back. It just especially in the summer, it's just so nice to be on the beach and the food. It's such a beautiful country. I go back and I kind of recharge. It gives me energy to get through the winter and kind of survive another New York winter.
How long does it take you to transition from New York speed to Greek speed?
It's interesting. I mean, I do get frustrated sometimes when I'm in Greece and everyone just wants to like sit around and chill, and like it's got there's this cafe culture where it's just bros sitting around drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes all day, and like I want to sort of get shit done, but but pretty quickly. I mean, we try to get to the beach within 24 hours, and that also feels, in a way, just because like I know I'm charging up, that feels like I can it feels like it's also quality time. Like I'm not just, it's different from like sitting around just watching TV or something, or just like lying around.
Sure.
Lying on the beach feels productive somehow. It feels like you're charging, like the sun is energizing your body, and you're building up your power, and you're building up your strength to do whatever you need to do.
So it sounds like you have purpose, because I think people, and this is no knock on people without purpose, but they view those times as like pure rest, not in the service of something else. Like it has no utility.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you like ultimately to get things done.
Yeah, I mean, and that's almost a problem in a way, because I'm always trying to bring work, and my wife is always yelling at me because like I'll bring like a folder full of drawing. I'll be like, okay, I won't bring the paints this time because I didn't even touch them before, but I'll try to like, and of course I never get anything done, but because A, there's no time, and B, it's just ridiculous. It's like, what are you trying to, you're there for just a few weeks, and you can, it's But there's a part of me that's always trying to squeeze in projects. But I'll bring a sketchbook at the very least. I'll try to make drawings and, or read or plan things out. So I'm always, I think that part of me never really turns off. Also, my dad wasn't really a typical Greek, in terms of relaxing and chilling. He was an engineer. He's very kind of focused. He always had different projects going on. So, and he also knew how to relax hard as well. But, at the beach, it's like, you bring your snorkel, and then you swim out a mile or two, and then like he would just disappear, and then he'd come back with like all these beautiful shells that he dove down to catch. Or he used to go spearfish. He used to have a spear gun. He'd come back with an octopus and then bash it against a rock for like an hour, in front of all the, like, traumatizing all the kids on the beach. But because you got to tenderize the meat immediately. But so I think also like my Greek family also is not typical of what what people think of if they know of any Greek families, or so, and also my dad in particular. So I think I got a lot of that from him as well. And my mother's from Connecticut, so she's got I think there's a little bit of that New England, like, sort of, trying to always be productive, always sort of that kind of work ethic. So I kind of got a little bit of both, but
yeah, that's a beautiful mix.
Yeah.
Do you find that you're in tension with those all the time, or you can, at this point in your life, make compartments, like you're saying, you go in the summer, or are you in New York and you're like, damn, I wish I was in Greece, and vice versa, or you've kind of resolved that duality?
It's a good tension. Ultimately I think I'm always going to be like sort of nomadic or seasonal, like a seasonal bird, like you fly. What I'd like to do is like extend the periods in each place. And I can see that that's sort of what I've been trying to put together for years. Like, initially with trying to move more towards, in terms of some of the money work I do that's art related, but it's more like more like related to my work at SVA. Like before like 10 or so years ago, I was like, oh man, I need to like get an MFA so I can start, I need to figure out how to teach, so I can work less, and get paid more for that time. And then open up more time, because my goal has always been to kind of open up more time to make work, and to kind of like, because time is the most valuable thing. but then beyond that, the goal was also to be able to just sort of like go away for long periods of time and sort of, so ultimately I'd like to, be able to go, be there for like the whole summer and then be here for the whole winter. And that's kind of hopefully what I'm, continuing to push towards. So, but it's a good tension. The two play off each other. I think my Greekness or the Greek part of my personality actually really helps in New York, because Greeks are, Greeks always, everyone thinks they're smarter than everyone else. So they're always trying to it's definitely a hustle. It's a haggling culture, and it's sort of a hustling culture. It's a marketplace culture. No one's going to pay full price. You're always going to find some way to get a discount or let's sort of bend the rules a little bit. So that kind of assertiveness and sort of, and I guess you could call it entitlement, but it's sort of like it's also like it's an Italian thing too. It's very New York, because New York's also like, it's always been like a marketplace, since it was founded by the Dutch. It was like it's a city of commerce. It's a city of people trying to get the best deal. So I think it's really helpful to be able to tap in that energy here, and because otherwise you just get run over. So
yeah, I don't think it's entitlement. It might be the opposite. It's like this necessity to get by.
Yeah, it's like survival,
Yeah. So what does your name mean, Panayiotis?
It means the prefix bano is from epano, which means above, and agio is holy, so it's holy of holies. Panayoti.
Wow.
But generally it's a Greek Orthodox name that refers to the Virgin Mary, and it's probably the most common Greek name, like one of the most common Greek names, like definitely the top like 5, if not the top 3. Whenever I go to Greece, or even before I get there, like if we're waiting, if we have a connecting flight, if we're waiting in an airport in Munich to catch the flight to Athens or Thessaloniki, like I'll hear my name, I'll hear my name before we get to the gate. Like we're close to the gate, and I look ahead and I see like a crowd of these like stressed out, nervous, like, middle-aged balding men, just kind of pacing, and then someone shouting "Panayoti," and it's like some little kid that's messing around the corner, and or it's an old man, So it's
wow.
It's a very common name, but there's no direct translation. So that's why, unless you know like Greek Americans in the U.S., you may not have heard of it, and people get they see it spelled out, and they kind of freak out because of all the vowels and the Y, and
So you can also fluctuate between being exotic and completely ordinary.
Yeah. That's
that's cool.
I didn't take. I could have been Peter, but that's Petros. So I never kind of simplified it. These days people call me Pan, but people have called me like Panayiotis, Pinayoti. Back when it was sort of a mangling of my full name, people would always ask me, they'd say, "Oh, were your parents hippies?" Like, "Oh, Peyote."
Oh, sure.
They'd want to call me Peyote. So.
Do you love the name?
It's my name. I appreciate it. I think
that's good.
I think it pops out on the list. It's very Greek. I don't know if it's helped or hurt me in terms of like people finding me because they can't spell my name. But I also like that I like Pan as well, because that feels like because that also kind of refers to inadvertently, it kind of refers to an older part of Greek culture, because my full name is Greek Orthodox, but Pan, you think of the satyrs and the goat man,
yeah,
that used to come with Dionysius, and sort of rile everyone up and these blood orgies and whatnot.
Does that fit your personality?
Not these days. I think everyone's got a little bit of that, but that's something we all need to kind of keep in check. It's the balance between I guess these days I'm more Apollonian, right? I'm more like trying to bring the light and trying to be disciplined and controlled. I had plenty of that. There were years where I sort of indulged a little bit too much. Like specifically in high school. I kind of got into some some shit. We don't need to go too much into it, but a lot of the things people get into in college, I sort of got into that stuff early on, and almost completely derailed my life. So yeah, I mean, just kind of finding, figuring, like I said, realizing that I could use art to kind of achieve some of those same states, without all the negative, all the price you pay, if you're
Sure.
using different substances, and the way that's going to kind of melt down your, yourself, your personality, your energy, your motivation, your health. That was huge for me. That was like a gift, that moment. I remember I was listening to the White Album, and I because I'd read Helter Skelter, and and there was that theory that the prosecutor came up with that, may or may not have been true, but that Manson was obsessed with the Beatles, and he was hearing messages in the White Album, and he thought that the Beatles were telling him to send his followers out to kill rich people and start a race war. But anyway, I was fascinated specifically just by it's just such a crazy story. And I grew up, with the Beatles, the music of the Beatles. And I was like, and it's such an odd album. So I became really fascinated with that album. Anyway, I was like, kind of going through a phase where I was revisiting it. So I was playing that album over and over again while I was painting, when I had that sort of moment. Yeah.
I mean, what I'm getting is there's a sense of strong contrast.
Yeah.
Like duality.
Yeah.
And that makes sense for the work, because there's this ancient feeling, but this futurist feeling at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also like, it seems pretty Greek at times, right? Like what you're pulling from.
Yeah. And I avoided that for a while. But I think maybe about 12 years ago, I took another look at classical art, because it just felt like it would be too obvious for a Greek guy to be pulling from classical antiquity, or the whatever era, any kind of Greek references. It seemed like too obvious, like too on the nose. But I started sort of sampling elements from sort of traditionally ancient Greek imagery, in a generic sense, not like not like a scholar of the classic, just like a very surface level sampling of it, because I realized it kind of lined up with some other ideas I had at the time. I realized it's been used so much that it's neutral, and it's kind of empty. There's so many different artists and writers, different political movements who have tried to take the remnants of ancient Greek culture, the bits and pieces, and sort of mold it into whatever they wanted to, whatever agenda they had, whatever sort of message or idea that they wanted to push. And I realized it was just this kind of neutral thing. It's like a sticker. It's like something you can see on a coffee cup in a Greek diner. And I was kind of interested in that at the time, because I'd gotten really deep into printmaking, and the fact that printmaking is so mechanical and it's so robotic. When you're doing it right, you really have to sort of be consistent and do the same thing over and over again like a robot. And it felt really weird I was making these screen prints of these drawings that had a very specific style that people could identify as my own, and I wanted to get away from that. So I was trying to pull from like clickbait advertising, and I was collaging just like Sky Mall images from Sky Mall catalogs, and just this sort of junk, like this garbage, and trying to like just pull it and depersonalize my own work a little bit. And I realized I could do that with ancient Greece. But I sort of feel with the future and past thing, that's not something that I sat down and thought about and decided I would do. But after pulling from different sources of inspiration, I realized, it's at a certain point I looked at what I was doing and I was like, this is kind of like the condition that we're all living in, where you have every era all available to us all at once. Like there's just so much media, there's so much
we can access so much information, and it's not such a new thing, but it's definitely accelerated, especially with the internet and with this feeling that we're like in the future already, that we're living in a dystopian sci-fi novel already, or we have been for 15 years already. And I kind of grew up on the sci-fi blockbusters of the 90s and 80s, Terminator 2 and The Abyss and the Alien series, like all that stuff had a huge impact on me and just kind of burned it. That also left an impression on me, in addition to kind of growing up in a country where you have ruins from like many different eras, all just kind of, visible on the street. Not even just like kind of ancient Greek ruins, but also ruins of Byzantine, like walls from the Middle Ages that were built by that were built during the Byzantine era of the Eastern Roman Empire, and churches that are like 1,000 years old, and like neoclassical apartment buildings and houses, mansions that are falling apart from the 1800s. And all that stuff is just there. It's just all rotting together, and then you have like stores selling like electronics across the street. And it was just all that stuff mashed together. Just, I think it felt natural to kind of mash it all together in my own work too, because as opposed to like have a pure focus on one era or another, because that sort of felt like a kind of escapism, I guess. But
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I relate to this idea of like, I don't want to depict the present. I don't want to draw genes on someone, etc. But it's interesting that you would call that escapism, because sometimes I feel cowardly for not wanting to, I don't know, draw the time I live in. It's like, obviously Hokusai is like, he's drawing what he's seeing around him, probably because he was more at peace with his culture. Yeah. In some sense.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way too. I'm like, well, this is, I'm just making up I'm just kind of making up another pipe dream for, just another, this is a different form of escapism in a way. But
well, is it a pipe dream or is it a dystopia? That's why I can't really tell.
I think it's a bit of both. I think you just kind of need to lean into it. I mean, it's just horrible and beautiful at the same time. I can't like tell.
In terms of your world that it's inhabited, do you feel that it's not one or the other, right?
I think it depends on the project. I mean, there's definitely I did a few collages where I was sort of it's 4 collages, but I've made other work that printed collage work, I guess, where I'm pulling from scraps of different things and mashing things together, and which has this sort of very dark energy. And so I think with those, I sort of leaned into that feeling of everything is sort of on fire and falling apart, and it's just this nightmare world, and almost wanting the end to come and wanting the whole thing to be obliterated. And so, you're leaning into the chaos. But then with the faces and with some of the paintings, I'm also just sort of playing with, I'm escaping into playing with color and form, and it's sort of like, you're working. It's hard to just. I always have something playing in the background, like whether it's a podcast or music or something. But you're putting yourself to work, and the goal is to get yourself to the point where you forget that you're there, you forget what you're doing, and you're just kind of in the process, and you're just enjoying putting one color next to another and sort of putting, depicting forms. And so it's not always that conscious, but yeah, I do wonder how certain, probably better not to think about it too much, but whether something is like why, or whether people enjoy looking at certain work that I do, and then why they do, because people use the word beautiful a lot, and I'm like, I don't know if that's good or not. It's
I think it's good. I think it's good.
Yeah,
I don't think they mean traditionally beautiful, because they could say it's like the colors can be garish in some sense, but they are beautiful. I think the color is optimistic, and the content can be cynical, or there's like some tension there.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, like the future, or these future faces as really rainbow, sugary, candy looking, as opposed to like cold metal.
Yeah, yeah.
And you think these, I guess I'm thinking back to that thing you said about drawing the upside down Chuck Close face project. You think it's the nature of that assignment that saved you, or just the self-portrait in and of itself?
It was just painting. It was just the fact that I could.
Oh, it was just
like,
painting.
Yeah, I was like the fact that I could just do this thing, and I could focus on this thing, and it feels as good as getting high. And I'm not gonna, you know, it's not gonna wear off in an hour. I'm not gonna, you know, it's not gonna sort of destabilize the rest of my, you know, the rest of my week, and. Yeah, and it was just making, basically. But in terms of the faces, and I think the fact that it was upside down, we had to paint in black and white, and it was sort of like I wasn't so tied to making it look good that like that moment sort of, yeah, it just like, here's another thing, here's something else you could do instead. You know, it's just a reminder. You know, like, remember this.
Right.
But yeah, with the faces, yeah, these future faces, like, in some ways, you know, it's funny you say they're a little cynical because it is, you know, it's not one thing I don't think about that much consciously, but when I think about it a little bit, it might have something to do with how just how people's personalities are so ephemeral, especially, and you know, you see how people's personalities can change with their habits, and specifically with their habits in regards to technology and communications, and you know, how they portray themselves on a platform versus how they are in real life, and you know, the kind of beliefs you see them picking up. And yeah, I mean, these are thoughts I've had after making these faces, but you know, I'm like, well, sometimes I wonder, like, what are all these faces I'm making? What do they want? They're all just staring straight ahead. What do they want? What are they thinking? Are they gods, or are they sort of just like a stripped down node of personality, or is it like the building blocks of a personality? Because I mean, a face, I read a theory that there's a theory that we evolved to have faces because we're social animals. And so, you know, a face signifies immediately, you know, what you're about. You know, that's the first thing people will pick up, or they'll read into, whether it's accurate or not. They see your face, and they immediately, in an instant, form all kinds of preconceptions about your health, about your energy levels, about, you know, whether you're threatening or not, all kinds of things. And we actually know more about people than we consciously realize or let ourselves believe, you know, and I'm really interested in that too. What we know that we don't know, we know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're more masks, right? Now that I'm thinking about it, they're less faces to me, more masks. And they're definitely more like demigods or demiurges than, none of them have ever struck me as God.
Yeah.
They feel like or they feel like hyper-evolved humans. I think what's interesting to me is how much I can get out of them, and probably what you can get out of them, obviously. It's why you keep drawing them. Just from this kind of repetitive, in a good way, depiction of them, these series of faces.
Well, they're fun to make, and it's, you know, the forms, like I just enjoy making them, but then, yeah, there's so much you can do in faces. We're just primed to see faces everywhere. So, you know, you put together something that sort of looks like two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And you can really push that to the limit, but people will, if it's close to, if it's near that, you know, if it's close enough to that territory, then people will interpret it as a face, and so they're gonna react to it. And I like I guess I like to make, whether, maybe beautiful is, people are saying beautiful, but they really, what they really mean is it's powerful, or it activates them somehow, which I guess is kind of these days that's beautiful. Like if you get a charge from something, if something affects you and you don't forget it, then that's beautiful in a way, even if you're using something that's repellent to make that, or garish.
Yeah, I think that's a semantic mistake by people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like one is, you might say attractive in that it attracts attention, but beauty is very different, although hard to talk about.
Yeah.
I think what people sense maybe is there's a traditional quality with like the fruit depiction, the kind of ancient qualities. And I think there is a sensibility Europeans often have that is just, I would say, more beautiful, without getting into explaining it too much. But I think Europe is just more beautiful in the traditional sense than America for a ton of reasons. But why do you think the fruit still life thing comes up so often?
Oh yeah, so that's sort of another thing that I just kept doodling fruits compulsively. I think it was around 2019 that I decided, it just made its way into my work. First in a commercial piece, I did a poster design for Elsewhere Space, this design duo, iBodega. They reached out to me, and they wanted to work with me to make a poster for their upcoming shows. And I was like, this is the perfect project. Let me just pull from stuff I've been drawing. And but the fruits, like, I just it's another thing, like a face. Everyone knows what a fruit looks like. Everyone's got an idea of a fruit, and I guess I was sort of trying to boil fruits down to the most sort of like the simplest, like dumbest, most like elemental platonic ideal of a fruit. And I kind of went, and it would just seem so dumb, but also something that like could appeal to everyone. And another thing, like a face that you could kind of stretch out. Not that I was trying to appeal to everyone, but I thought that I wanted to see what would happen if I pulled it into my work. Like, it's so general, and so like anonymous. And I guess that's another example of that, where I'm trying to like, depersonalize what I'm doing, and by pulling in these general ideas. So,
well, it's fundamental.
Yeah.
So sometimes I get confused by like, I think there's this weird tension where you want to avoid fundamental things because you feel like you're selling out sometimes, because you're just depicting this easily digestible thing. But then there's that whole notion that there's a reason it's fundamental. There's a reason it keeps appearing. And I think for a long time I avoided stuff like that because I thought it was cheap. But it's actually the opposite, because now you're tasked with making something really common appear magical. Yeah. And that's much harder, I would say, than taking like some weird, wacky image and presenting it to someone. Yeah, no, I wanted to make something. I wanted to take something really basic and like stupid and boring and like cliche, like, and just it's like an empty vessel. I can play with. It can just be a way to make a composition. I can play with form and with color, and again, it's like a art sort of art school trope. It's how you learn how to draw or how to paint. You always do, like, you do fruit still life or the vanitas paintings, like there's all these references there. So I think it's almost a power move to lean into the cliche, or you lean into the thing that's really obvious, but you do it so hard that it becomes new again, and it becomes even more powerful because it's like unexpected, because it's right there. You do the thing that's most obvious because everyone thinks like, why would you do that? Yes. So that's kind of where the fruit. I think the fruits. I might be, maybe I'm at peak fruit, or I kind of passed peak fruit. And it's time to put the fruits aside. But I don't know. I mean, I still enjoy
I just banged out another zine because I hadn't made a zine in a while, and I wanted to have something new for Brooklyn Art Book Fair, and there were a few fruits that made their way into that one, but I think I figured out everything I can do with fruits for now, and maybe I'll put them aside for now and figure, kind of shift onto something else.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned depersonalization twice. Mm-hmm. Why is that a goal?
I think just because transcendence is something that I, like transcending yourself and transcending like just being human and being mortal and having a certain being limited has always been something that's attracted to me to the creative process, because I guess it's a powerful thing to elevate yourself beyond your limitations. I guess that's I've never really thought about it that way specifically, but based on other things we've been talking about, I realized that that's part of it. But when I've spoken about this before in the past, I guess part of it has been that part of it came from printmaking. I got really into using screen printing and lithography and different kind of very mechanical forms of repeating an image over and over again. I got really into those techniques when I was in art school, and kind of brought them into that. Became a core part of my work. The way I was able to make my work and get it out there initially, and make all these connections and start being part of the conversation by making books and zines and getting stuff out there, making it portable. But I started thinking a lot about machines in the process, because I realized, like, if you're working with printmaking, you're part of a big machine, and you're just the fleshy part of the machine. You're the operator, but you're also like the lever and the gear, and and sort of, I was interested in that. I wanted to lean into that. And it was also at a time in the late 2000s and early 2010s, like the first few years when I was kind of out of school, but still in school, because I was working at an art school in a printmaking department. So, but I was, I was starting to show my work. My work was starting to get around. I was starting to have some of what I was doing circulate in different scenes and different worlds. And at the same time I was interested in technology. It sort of felt like we were living in the future, and I was pulling from the imagery that sort of felt like it was making references to technology and patterns and automation. And because, we were definitely, technology was accelerating, and the ways that was just kind of creeping into our everyday lives was accelerating. So I was interested in that, but, I wanted to reflect that feeling of depersonalization and being part of a machine, and sort of what would a machine make. This is 13 years before, or 15 years before, like, actual AI programs that mash up, images from a database of stolen artwork, whatever these mid-journey. Right. So now we have actual AI, and it looks like shit. But I was trying to think, like, what would how can you just let the machine run its course? So I was trying to, like, get out of my own way. And I think that's something that artists have always tried to do. And whether you call it, like, whether you try to approach it from a mechanical, or from where you try to pretend that you're pulling yourself out of the process and you're not making the decisions, you let something else make the decisions. Like, you pretend that it's the machine, that you just kind of set things up and it takes its own course, or you're summoning a demon, or you're letting the unconscious, depending on whatever era, there was always something else that's not you, that sort of is responsible for the imagery. And I've always sort of had that approach, like if I sit down and decide I want to make something, and I'm very conscious of it, it never works. It's always when I just work intuitively. And so I guess that's my own way of doing that. Right.
Yeah, and it can get too demystifying if we talk about it too much. So we'll stop on that. But it's a good transition to the RisoLAB, or RisoLAB. I don't know what you call it. So when did you start that, and how did that come about?
So I had gotten a hold of a Riso, and I was in grad school at SVA in 2015, early 2015, and there was this chair of a small MFA program that was trying to start a space dedicated to the Riso process, and he recruited me and kind of brought me in, and I just wanted to teach, but he needed, he didn't really have, he had a background as in printmaking, and he's an illustrator, so he knew a bit about the printmaking process, but not so much about Riso printing. So he kind of brought me in to start that space in 2015, and it started with just a few classes, both taught by me and not really any staff whatsoever. It was just kind of me and some student assistants. So I was sort of doing everything and doing it all part-time and teaching and trying to figure out how you teach classes with this kind of odd Japanese copy machine technology, and eventually, we added more faculty, we added more staff, and it just sort of took on a life of its own and just kept growing via word of mouth. And yeah, it just sort of snowballed, and it's become kind of an institution. I think the timing was perfect because 2015 was a time when people had some. If you said Riso to people that were doing art stuff, they might have a vague idea of what it was, maybe, but most people had never really seen one. It was impossible to access one. There were only like 2 or 3 people in New York that had a Riso. So we gave the public a chance to. Sorry about that. So. We gave people access, and we gave people a chance to sort of apply all the same printmaking techniques to the process the way I did, in a compressed form, over these 12-week classes, and then pay a lab fee to use the space. So that's sort of the model. You have to take a class. After you finish a class, you can then pay a lab access fee, and you can book print time during the open lab hours, but you really have to know what you're doing. You don't pay extra if you use it more. Everyone pays a flat rate, sort of like a gym membership. So some people just show up once a semester and they're subsidizing everyone else. But yeah, it works out. It's become this thriving, booming community, and it's become known outside of the SVA sphere. Some people don't even know they might not even know what SVA is, and they know about the RisoLAB.
Can you speak to the trajectory of Risograph? Because I remember, like you said, I remember first hearing about it. That must have been like 8 years ago or something. And yeah, there's something mysterious about it.
Yeah, that's right when we started. That was 2015.
Yeah, it was shocking because obviously they'd been around for a while, the machines.
Yeah.
But how do you feel things have differed now? Like, is it just commonplace? Is there less of a specific aesthetic and culture trying to use it? Is it more just a printing technique now, or is there still an identity attached to it?
There's still an identity, but it's just like opened up dramatically. And honestly, I think it's good that it's been kind of cracked open. Some of the identity and the specific thing, people think that there's a specific aesthetic associated with it, but I think that's just because certain people, certain kinds of creative people really jumped on it, and it made a lot of sense for them, like illustrators and cartoonists, and a lot of them work in a specific style, and that might be, the first sort of Riso work that people might have seen. But really you can print anything with a Riso. It's definitely expanded. There's a lot, but it's still not as easy to access a Riso. Like if you want to just, get on a machine and just start printing and actually run it yourself. We're really the only space, at least in New York, that gives that kind of access. There's a lot of Riso studios. There's a lot of publishers. I mean, it's just been a massive explosion. So it's, you know, so I would say, so I first heard about it in about 2010. There was, I had been very involved in the world of I guess artist books, because I was making artist books, and I got a book into printed matter. They became huge supporters of my work, and got my work into a lot of different places and opened up a lot of opportunities for me. And so people in that scene sort of knew, you know, there was some awareness of what I was doing, and there was a guy that was working for them, this intern who I became friends with, who had gotten hold of this machine that he called a Risograph. And, you know, he described it as this automated screen printing machine. And I, you know, he knew I was a big printmaker, so he kept harassing me to do a project on it. Right. And, you know, I couldn't picture what an automated screen printing machine would look like. You know, I thought it might be some kind of a gigantic mechanical contraption that would take up a whole room, and maybe you run it with a crank, and there's a motor on the end, and like there's a, you know, you get paint all over your shoes, just like this sort of, you know, just like a cast iron, like very loud mechanical sort of contraption. But, you know, he brought me to the space where he was storing it, and there's this like bloated yellowing copy machine with these really big buttons and like a grayscale screen. And I was honestly very disappointed. I was very underwhelmed when I first saw it. I didn't think, I was like, this is this automated screen printing machine, because my experience of screen printing was very physical, very messy, you know, and this was just like a box, you know. But right. The fact that you actually have to operate it, you load up the drums, but it just looks like a copy machine. That combination of it looking so ordinary and boring and kind of banal, and the fact that you have to actually run it, you have to sort of be a bit of a technician. I found that pretty exciting, and it felt like from a different, like it was this contraption from a different timeline, you know. And it was very liberating, because I was making these artist books that were hand printed, and I had to sell them for a pretty high price point because so much labor went into them. So suddenly I could produce a lot more in less time and sell it for cheap. So for me, it really blew up my artist book practice, and that sort of evolved into a publishing practice, and that led to me kind of starting Mega Press and starting thinking about publishing other people and doing collaborations with other artists, and you know, building that up as like another form of income, and as another way to actually take control of you know, my output, and put out more books and get them out farther, make them more accessible.
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to imagine how to describe this machine to like the average person, because it just doesn't sound that different. You know, they'd be like, why wouldn't you just do a digital print of a book?
It's like,
so how would you describe it to, like, you know, a man on the street and why it is appealing?
I mean, that's, you know, I feel like every other day you know, usually I'm describing it to people who at least have some sense of printmaking, but then sometimes there's people who don't even know what screen printing is. So it's, you know, it's like a Japanese printing machine where you build up your image with individual colors one by one, and you can print with up to 80 different beautiful pigment-rich colors. You have to design your artwork with those specific layers in mind. So it's more like printmaking than a copy machine, where it blends together just 4 colors to create a composite of the color file that you send to your inkjet, which is why sometimes, you know, this beautiful, vibrant RGB image just looks like shit. It just looks like mud when you send it to your HP and then if they know a little bit about printmaking, I usually, because I this is something I do, on a weekly basis. I'm still evangelizing. I'm still kind of introducing people to Riso. There's still people out there that don't know what it is, even who are artists, which is why I think that's, it's still, we're not even close to peak Riso. I think it's not going away. And I think if anything, it's going to accelerate and maybe crack open to the mainstream. But if someone knows, if they have some screen printing experience, or if they know anything about printmaking, I'll sort of make that connection. It's like a print shop in a box. It's like screen printing, but combined with a copy machine. Or, some people know what a mimeograph is. So it's sort of like a mimeograph, but it's digital. It's all automatic. So.
Yeah, it's just interesting how slight technological quirks can yield really different aesthetic outputs and appeals. I'm actually looking through my emails out of curiosity. The first time I have it in my emails is December 2011, because I was talking to Never Press, who was printing a book out of LA. So that was, 12 years ago. I'm like slightly a curmudgeon, so I'll probably lament when it's just kind of like another way to print something. Because like even when I started doing books for it back then, I thought of it as like the most primitive shit. Like I don't even think NeverPress could register colors, like 2 or 3 colors successfully, because their machine was kind of shitty.
Yeah.
And so I just thought of it as like, I don't even know. I like the texture. That was like the main thing for me, is the texture and the stretch marks.
Yeah.
That would happen, which they don't even happen anymore, because most people are just too good at printing. But again, it's an interesting contrast for your work, where it's like this embracing of technology, but also this trying to hold on to something more human.
Yeah. No, it felt perfect. It felt perfect for what I was printing. The first Riso book I did was a book with this artist, Leomi Sadler, who I think their work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been kind of emailing back and forth. We've been sending images back and forth for about a year, because Neves, that publisher from Switzerland, they had put out a zine of each of ours at the same time. And for me, that was an opening, because I loved her work, and I'd been kind of lurking on her. She had a LiveJournal page, because a lot of artists, even though LiveJournal was sort of like cringy and dying even back then, and like there were a few artists that were, like Matt Locke also had a LiveJournal that would post drawings and stuff. And I found, and also Nick Gazin, who's someone I went to school with, he had a LiveJournal where he would just kind of like, so I'd sort of like seen their work online, and then like, it just kept popping up here and there. And there were a lot of aspects of what Leomi was doing that really appealed to me. And I reached out after that Neves book was published, and they knew about my work as well. And, we just kind of started emailing back and forth, and, I proposed that we do like some kind of collaboration. So we were sitting on all this material, and it was the perfect, but we still hadn't met. Like we'd been sending these long emails back and forth, and, mailing packages of drawings back and forth, and scanning them, and then emailing images back. So it was this sort of like analog, digital, online, offline, free form kind of compost process, where we were just like melting down each other's images and like collaging them and tearing them apart. It was very liberating, and it was the perfect thing to sort of slap on. I quickly threw together all these color separations on paper, because I didn't print from a computer for the first 5 years that I used Riso. I didn't have access to networked Risos until I got a chance to start the lab, and suddenly I had these brand new machines. But at that point, I printed my first book on my friend. His name was Alex Damianos, and he's completely disappeared from he kind of dropped out of the artist book scene, and I don't even know. I think he like went and studied law. He moved back to the UK and studied law, and now he's like a professor there, I think. But But he'd gotten a Riso, and it was this GR that was half broken. And every time you made a master, you had to peel the old master off the drum, and so your hands were always all inky, and like you could never get the registration right. But it was just really exciting to see those sheets just kind of fly out of the machine. And he just left me in a room with these. I had a pile of scrappy color separations that I had thrown together the day before. To make this book, and I was able to make the whole book in a day. So it was just really liberating to be able to maximize my productivity, and to get. I realized that I could actually maybe become a publisher, as opposed to just like an artist making these very precious hand printed books that were hand bound and were like these art objects, that I couldn't afford. I couldn't afford my own art,
Yeah, that is an issue.
So, and yeah, you're right. I mean, these days it's just too good. I mean, we teach people at the lab we try to be state of the art and like space age, but I think there's something to be said for just the scrappy, down and dirty, like off the glass printing, where you're just like printing one layer over another layer, and it's more like an old school Xerox kind of,
right,
zine making process.
And so when did MegaPress emerge? At the same time?
After a couple of years. I mean, I'd say when I finally pulled the trigger and bought a Riso, like I bought a Riso off of eBay, and it was broken. I had to sell it for scrap. I got a slight refund, but I kind of ate it because I didn't want to ship it back. I could have figured out freight shipping, but I was just so freaked out. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I found a tech who told me it was like, actually had 10,300,000 prints on it, not 300,000 prints on it. So they had used it, they had run it into the ground, and then it
10 million.
Sold 10 million. Yeah. I mean, it printed, but it was just like, it had a lot of issues. So I found a tech who could, he wasn't able, so the scanning bed was like, the wires were all tangled up. So it only scanned the first few inches of the image and then drag the rest. And so he came to my studio to look at it, and he looked at it, he's like, this thing's got 10 million prints on it, like, even though the odometer says it's got 300,000.
They ran it back on you?
They just unloaded on me. So I could have shipped it back, but I was like, okay, whatever, I'll just eat it. Between their discount, they gave me a partial refund, and what this guy was paying me the loss, I lost like a few $100, and then I bought a refurbished machine, and I was kind of up and running. But when I bought that machine, I got it because I wanted to make a publication called Trapper Keeper, which I wanted to make this dystopian sci-fi publication and throw together artists from this sort of the experimental comics / zines, scenes, and then also artist friends that were painters and sculptors whose work didn't really circulate in these kinds of publications. And I wanted them all to react to the prompt that we were already living in a, cyberpunk dystopia in 2013. Like I felt like we were already living in dark times, but somehow there was still, people just weren't really accepting it or realizing it. And I think that all sort of became clear to everyone a few years later, like when and maybe that's just like an abusive media industry that was just trying to like pump as many views as they could by stressing everyone the fuck out and really, shoving terrible news in our faces. But things already seemed kind of dark to me. Again, I'm someone who had a sense of foreboding about the future since I was, a senior or a junior in high school. Like I thought, I thought bad shit was going to go down, at the turn of the millennium, and then it didn't. But then 9/11 happened, so there's a whole other thing. But so that publication, I realized I could just buy a machine, and instead of for what it would cost to get it printed offset, I could just buy a Riso. So that was the start of MegaPress. That was the first official MegaPress release. It was Trapper Keeper 1. then after that, I mean, I did some contract printing initially, like printing for people, but quickly sort of started turning that stuff away because I didn't really have time to print for other people. But that was really helpful. It's nice to have. The nice thing about printmaking and having these different skills is you have a trade that you can fall back on sometimes to subsidize your creative practice, and it's like one of the kind of working class, like printers, people that can fabricate stuff, people who work for sculptors. It's like, if you have, those are real skills, and it's one thing that, I tell students, like they should try to learn these different things, because you can buy time with these valuable skills to make your art, and not have to do something else that has nothing to do with, with your craft.
So is that how you built financial stability, by teaching and running the publishing operation?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a combination of things. I've never worked full-time at anything. When I got out of school, I got a job as a technician in the printmaking department at SVA. But I was always part-time. I lived in South Brooklyn in a big house with a bunch of people. And, I would juggle that and freelance illustration. And sometimes I would do printmaking jobs for people and just like a bunch of things here and there. But I just lived very cheaply for years and years, and just like had a very low overhead. So I've done a lot of different things. Teaching is great because you sort of get a chance to just talk and talk about your ideas, and it keeps you connected to kind of the young energy of students that are just coming up, and you have kind of like, you can sort of workshop different ideas too for different projects. I'm going to be teaching a lot less going forward, which is kind of nice, but it's been great too. And I'll probably always teach a little bit here and there. But I really enjoy that aspect, that and being able to make things. I think that's what you have to do. You have to juggle a bunch of different things. And I think it's rare to immediately have what you do, even if it does strike a chord, which I think I was lucky to get some opportunities in the beginning. It takes a long time for that to be consistent enough to really be a real source of regular income.
Yeah, I don't know if that ever stops.
As everyone knows, I mean, it's,
some people get it early, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
I find jugglers are more interesting to me. Like you're embracing painting more, right?
Yeah, no, I decided, I guess during the pandemic, because I kind of wanted to. I've always painted. I've been painting on paper and gouache for years, but I wanted to sort of see if I wanted to kind of go back to potentially working on canvas, because I wanted to scale up. But on paper, first of all, with gouache, you lay down a color and then that's kind of it. You can't really just work it. You can't work into it. It's a bit faster, I guess. Like, if you make a move that you can't just cover it up and work back into it, and then the paper would fall apart. It just doesn't work. But with canvas or with other mediums, you can spend a long time on something and really kind of get lost in it. And I wanted to go back to that, because I wanted to kind of like have something that I could just work on large scale and just really be indulgent with time and with materials. And especially right before a year before the pandemic, I got a big studio in Gowanus, and I had space, I had a lot of space again to scale up. I mean, I've had studios on and off. I think that was after about a year and a half of not having a studio. But I had a big space, and it sort of like called for making something big. And then suddenly I had time. So, I kind of slowly worked my way back into working with oils on canvas. And I just had a show in May. It was a 4-person show with my gallery, Good Naked. They found a space up. They secured a space in Greenpoint, and we had a show that was up for a month, and I showed 3 big pieces on canvas, oil paintings on canvas, that I'd spent about a year working on without showing anyone until that show.
Nice. And that's something you want to pursue, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I want to keep that going. I want to, I think that's something I want to have as like an ongoing thing. And that's a whole different game than, with zines and with publications. I know I can make something. There's people out there that will pick it up. They'll like the edition will sell. People will buy it with paintings. It's sort of it's a different audience, and that's a different sort of world. And I've made big works and shown in galleries on and off, like as a parallel to all this work with printmaking and all the other kinds of work that I've done. But in terms of getting to that world, you need like a liaison. You need like someone who's gonna get it in there. And I've been working with Jacqueline Cedar, who started this gallery, Good Naked, that sort of took off during the pandemic, and she's been able to find some homes for some of my stuff. So it's it would be great to increase that and just to expand that. But I don't think I would ever completely switch, and I think I'll always be involved in making kind of more affordable editions and being part of the conversation with zines and sort of these smaller publications, and the two sort of feed on each other too, I think.
Yeah, and stylistically, I assume you feel kind of comfortable, like you've figured out the visual language you want to use for the rest of your life?
Well, I mean,
is that fair?
It's I know
that's scary too.
Yeah, the rest.
But no, I mean, a lot of people I interview, it seems like in their 30s, they kind of get the foundation figured out.
Yeah.
Of the visual style.
Yeah.
Maybe because I speak to people who I think make visually good art. I could imagine conceptual artists who are more interested in like subverting that here and there.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good thing. I think it sounds like a bad thing sometimes.
Yeah.
But what I mean is the work, there's a consistent visual language that's distinct. Yes. And I'm assuming you're content, and by that I mean like comfortable, content with that visual language.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm making for myself primarily. Like I want to make things because I'm trying to see where it's going to go, and it's more of like, it's almost like I'd say it's a cross between like a practice, like a physical practice, like going to the gym, or it's like a discipline. It's also a bit of I don't want to call it a spiritual practice, but it's sort of like a path. It's this thing that you keep doing, and you sort of follow where it takes you, and you're trying to figure it out as well. I mean, I definitely want to keep expanding it, and I want it to evolve. It's sort of like you're keeping this thing alive, and you want to have, like the work that I did 10 years ago and the work that I'm doing now, I do see there is like a connection, there's an evolution. It changes but I would love to, I've really wanted to sort of see if I can work in earth tones, or, I want to like write a graphic novel, or, there's a lot of other things I want to do. So I want to keep expanding.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you've done a lot, but what do you see ahead?
I mean, exactly that. I would like to see, I've toyed about these different ideas, doing something that's more narrative and that's more specific, and that's where I maybe write something, going back to writing, which is another, I didn't know, there was a point where I didn't know if I was going to be a writer or a visual artist, and I kind of moved more towards the visual. And I've done comics here and there too, but to do some kind of a long form story, I think would be very satisfying. It'd be a lot of work and not a lot of payoff, because that's comics are just pain.
Yeah.
And then you put so much work into it, and then people read it in 30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Comics are the real, the real gym of drawing.
Yeah.
They're just pain.
Yeah.
But you learn so quick and so much, and what I found was it forced you to draw things you never want to draw. Like maybe a person in, like, for instance, I didn't really draw people in places for a long time when I was younger. And then eventually, if you're drawing a story, you're like, well, I need to figure out how to draw a background.
Yeah.
I need to figure out how to draw a city or a forest. I think it's like the best drawing school you can go to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'd love to see, I'd be very curious what you would do in a longer format graphic novel, but yeah, that shit takes so long. It's so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to like that. I like that idea because it's also could be a jumping off point to something bigger, like a, it could become a movie. But then there's people that say like, well, it's a different thing. And, comics is one thing, they're the purists or whatever, but you could have both. I mean, it's just I guess getting stories out there, like writing an actual story as opposed to making these images. I don't know. I've done a lot of stuff with installation. It'd be nice to do that again sometime. But yeah, I'm right now. I guess I finished a bunch of big projects, so I'm sort of in between. I'm trying to figure out what the next thing is.
Well, I assume you're about to go to Greece, no?
Yeah, in about a month. We're wrapping up I'm in my summer semester, so I've got another 5 weeks of classes, and then the lab I'll leave before the lab shuts down, but then the lab will shut down for a little while. But yeah, I kind of like just sort of, it's just a slide, the next 5 weeks, just a slide to August, and then we'll be on the beach for 3 weeks.
And then you can just kind of exhale. It's nice. You never know what you'll take in, really.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you're not concerned with this notion of being a purist, right? Like, you have a very multidisciplinary approach.
No, I mean, yeah, I do a lot of things, and I've always, I've wondered. There's been times where I've wondered whether I should just focus on one thing. Whether it's like, do I have too many? Am I spread too thin? Do I have too many? Too many kind of pots on the fire. But I think for me, it works, and I think it's good because they all relate to each other and they all support each other, and one leads to another. Even though people get confused, people like when they found out I was having a show, they were like, "Oh, so are you switching more towards the gallery world now?" I was like, "Well, I've always shown in galleries, like, I'll do, yeah, people, some people know this aspect of what I do. Some people know a different aspect of what I do. But I think that it all comes down to like the image. It's either a drawing, or it's either drawing or color or collage, and maybe filtered through some kind of a print medium. And I like sort of scaling that up and down. And there's a lot of so I did a talk a couple months ago at this artist book conference at BU, and I tried to make connections between images in my zines and the paintings that they came from, like the zines where there might be a face, but that was actually a Riso sort of a CMYK print of a painting that was also shown in this exhibition, or this drawing was published in the zine, but then I took the same drawing and I printed it on a giant banner, screen printed on a banner, and sort of how the work jumps from different mediums and jumps from project to project and sort of gets recycled. So that keeps it fresh for me, that I just sort of like take images and just sort of like compost them into the next project. And just,
that's an interesting way to put it, composting.
Yeah.
I like that. It makes sense. It's another thing I often think about. It's just like, I'm kind of trying to understand what's the natural mode of making.
Mm-hmm.
You know, would it be a forced type of careerism to just do one thing really, really well? Or is there just different personalities? Like, I'm sure that there's certain comic book artists who just wanted to work on one book their whole life, you know, and they could do it, and they could do it, I wouldn't say in a happy way, but in like a fulfilled way. And I don't know how much that's a choice. You know, if you're like kind of a multidisciplinarian, I don't know how much you can turn that off, even if it's more beneficial financially to do one thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a question of personality, and same thing with style too. Like there's people who work, and you talked about, you know, my style and whether it's at a point where I'm happy with it. I think if anything, like the core of my, you know, the style sort of, I think I figured it out by the time I was like 22 or 23. That's when it sort of like gelled for me, and everything since has been a crystallization or a different form of that, or an expansion of that, honestly. But
were you happy with it then? That's an amazing, I feel like it's an amazingly rare accomplishment in some sense, because I think a lot of people don't like their work in their 20s, and they're like just trying to fight through, and then maybe in their 30s, 40s, et cetera, they can look back or look at their work today and be like, I actually enjoy what I'm making.
No, I mean, for me, like if I didn't like what I was making, it was painful. So it was like, it hurt me to make something that I didn't like. So I think throughout art school, because it felt like such a huge sacrifice, financial sacrifice, to be living in New York and to be going to this very expensive private art school with like, you know, taking out big loans and very minimal help from, you know, my family, and just, you know, that I didn't want to waste a second of it. So I was like constantly pumping stuff out, and it was sort of like what I thrived on. So I kind of like plowed through a bunch of different styles. Like I went through a phase where I was just making like 50 very messy Sumi ink drawings every day, because, you know, I was like looking at early Keith Haring stuff and thinking about him being in New York in the 70s, and like, you know, being kind of like upset about living in like Giuliani's sort of cleaned up New York in the early 2000s, because I had all these visions of New York from, you know, all my favorite, and all these artists that I loved and musicians were there when it was like a falling apart ruin, you know. And so I went through that phase, and then I kind of got that out of my system, and then I went through Philip Guston phase, and eventually so I was always sort of I was trying to make what I liked in other artists' work, and I was always trying to please myself. But I guess, you know, what I was about to say with the style thing is, you know, there's people who can work in many different styles, and, you know, that's a huge, I mean, I could force myself to, but it would hurt a lot, and it would not look good. Like I have to work, and I have my style is a range, I guess. I have different ways of making, but it always sort of looks like me. You know, I have different sort of, it's always, it's not like different styles. It's like a hydra, where it's just different heads coming from the same snake. It's not different snakes. You know what I mean? It's not it's not different monsters. But some people have different, can work in, they can mimic many different styles. Like a good friend of mine, Riso, he could like work in many different styles. And you know, I think sometimes those people sometimes wish they could, like, you know, I don't know how he felt about it. He's a good friend, great artist, sort of left comics and printmaking and art to become a developer. So like a lot of artists I know, kind of got scooped up into the tech world. And he's still a good friend, but you know, people who can work in many different styles, it's like it's always a sort of like a grass is greener scenario, where people who can only make work that looks like their own work wish they could also sort of sample other people's styles. So, you know, you're right. It's like, you don't really have a choice. Same thing with doing different kinds of things. I have a lot of different kind of interests. I have a lot of different interests. I have a lot of different things I want to do in my life outside of my art practice. And I think just doing a lot of different things is just always going to be part of part of what I spend my time doing. So I can't help it.
I'm kind of curious if you could describe the transition from putting on these different artist hats, you know, literally like the Guston face, the herring face.
Yeah.
Do you remember the last artist that you were trying to put on before you got to where you got? Or was it like was it subtle transition, or was it like a very sudden one?
I think it was pretty subtle, but I think the way, I think it all clicked together for me when I got into screen printing somehow. I think like, you know, because, you know, there was a crumb phase, like when I was in, I think even when I was in, I guess maybe early years of college, you know, maybe like crumb, and then different underground cartoonists, Doug Allen phase, you know, like Gary Lieb and Doug Allen, who did this comic Idiot Land, was a big influence on me when I found that when I was like 17 or something at like an underground bookstore. But yeah, I'm not sure. And then I discovered Fort Thunder and Paper Rad and Brian Chippendale, and I think like I looked at so many different, but I was also looking at like the Aztecs and the Mayans, and looking at pre-Columbian stuff and ancient art and outsider art, and, you know, Henry Darger, and just like looking at everything. You gotta, you know, actually I saw, so Gary Panter, who, he's actually, I haven't seen him in years, but I had him as a professor when I was in school, and, you know, we stayed friendly at, you know, we stayed kind of friends outside of, after I graduated, and I haven't seen him in a while, but he said something at a talk once where he was just into so many different things. Like he had so many different influences that like no one could really tell who he was ripping off or referencing. So that's the thing. You just like, if you pull from so many different sources initially, and, you know, of course, when you're like a student, your work is going to look exactly like what you're looking at. Like I had a student last year who was making beautiful, delicate sci-fi drawings, but I looked at his work and I was like, Mobius, you know what I mean? Immediately, yep. You know, I knew exactly what he was looking at. And like, you got to spice it up with some different influences. And if you combine it in a way, you know, it's going to look like Mobius for a while, but eventually you get it out of your system and it looks like you digest it and it becomes a part of you. And that's whatever.
Yeah. It's a good place to start, Mobius.
You know? Yeah.
It's funny because I would have thought, it's interesting to hear your influences. I think of like Giacometti and Hans Erni and these more like high art people. So it's kind of cool to hear more about the underground comics thing as being a thread from the beginning. Absolutely.
I mean, that's why I got so into printmaking, because I remembered all the stuff all the culture that I had to like dig up. I had to go to different physical, I mean, I'm a little older, so like you know, I was going online and stuff, but like, you know, it was a mix of like finding stuff online and finding stuff, you know, like finding stuff in a box in the back of this musty secondhand, you know, bookstore, used bookstore, and just like stumbling upon these, you know, same thing with records too. Like, you had to go out and dig for stuff. You couldn't just, I don't think there was Google. I think there was search.com, but it was not, there just wasn't, you know, like the internet was this other thing. The internet was like a zine, actually. It was like just this DIY thing, like people's like janky homemade websites. But yeah, so Jacqueline Cedar from Good Naked, who she's been kind of, you know, representing my stuff for a couple of years now. She mentioned Oscar Schlemmer, who was the guy, he was one of the members of the Bauhaus. He was the guy that designed the logo of that, the face. And I didn't really know his work. I sort of was like, who's that? And then she was like, oh, he's the guy who, you know, is more the Bauhaus. And I looked him up. I was like, oh, he designed all the costumes of the Bauhaus Ballet. And then I looked at his work, and he made all these like faces and figures, and I saw the connection, but I hadn't really seen him before. So I got really into his work recently, but not so much, I guess these days. I don't think I guess the difference between now and, you know, I guess 20 years ago when I was in art school is, you know, when I look at something I really like, I don't always, it doesn't immediately like show up in my work the next day. You know what I mean? It's more like,
yeah.
I might make a different move in response to that, but you know,
That's like making a friend in high school who suddenly influences the way you dress or talk or something. You're not gonna meet someone at 40 and be.
Yeah.
I hope not. I don't think most fully formed adults are that reactive.
Yeah.
So it's just a reflection of that stage of maturity, and also that kind of tragedy of like. I've mentioned this all the time, but Miyazaki, like when he saw Mobius's work, he had kind of already figured out his style. So he kind of lamented the fact that he couldn't take in more of it. He was just like, well, that's the phase, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good. Yeah. That is tragic. I mean, yeah. Well, now that you've mentioned that and your question about whether it's going to be my style for the rest of my life, I guess I don't have a choice, unless I like, if I hit my head, like if I fall off my bike or something, or if I get in a car accident, I have like a traumatic brain injury, then I guess you get a second chance, or you could just make radically different. But I guess anyone can just decide to. But I don't think
you can. Like I've done experiments like trying to not be myself when drawing. Yeah. And if you make enough drawings in that mode, you just end up back in the same place. It's very weird.
Yeah, like I guess one thing is my colors. Like I have a love-hate thing with the colors that I like to use, because it's even from high school. When I started using color, you know, I immediately gravitated towards these really vibrant neons and garish combinations. And my you know, my painting teacher was like, or my art teacher, who was colorblind, he you know, you could see a very limited spectrum, but he said, you know, he really liked my work, but he said like, you know, great work, but you know, maybe when you get to art school, you could like take a color theory class. And I mean, you know, I don't think my palette's changed that much since then. I think if anything, it got a bit more refined, and I figured some stuff out about color with printmaking, because you can only actually what it was I took a class first foundation year of art school. I took a class with this grizzled old painting teacher who was like I would say not like a greatest generation. He was sort of like a little too young to fight in World War II, but he came to New York when he was 16, like ran away from home and moved to New York, and like lived in a like a loft in Soho that only had cold water for $40 a month. And he just wanted to be an artist. And he, you know, he was just this, he was always like, you got to move your ass.
What does that mean?
Just like you got to work, basically. Like you gotta work. He's always like, you got to move your ass. You know, he's like very like, you know, just all about just doing it. And and he gave us, but he studied at Black Mountain College under Joseph Albers. Like he took Joseph Albers' color theory class, and so he gave us all the homework assignments that Joseph Albers gave him, which was like the first semester. We just every single assignment was like our homework. We had, I mean, we made a couple of big paintings, but in addition to that, every week for homework we had to like stretch a canvas, like stretch a canvas, you know, with a stretch a square canvas, make a grid. And it was like we were just painting these grids, and you had one set of colors based on specific instructions going along the top, and then you would mix them, you know, and then a different set of colors, whether it was like, you know, you're mixing all the colors that you had to buy for the class for the first assignment, and then seeing how they mixed, or you know, you had to add yellow to each one along the top and add a different color along the bottom, and so there was a lot of this sort of like limited palette work that I think also was a big, I think that was sort of important, ended up being kind of important, because I had to figure out how color worked. And then also with printmaking, you only have so many colors you can work with. So the more colors you add, the more work it is. So you're like, how can I be economical? But those bright colors, I sometimes just get nauseated at my palette, and I just I'm like, this is just, I can't even, you know, and I want to just go to monochrome or just paint in brown. But, you know, I always come back to it because it feels good. You know, it feels good to look at.
Yeah, it's no, I definitely understand what you're saying with screen printing, limiting the palette. You kind of want to get as much as you can out of the colors. You know, if you only got 3, you're going to make them pop. You're going to make them loud.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and it's powerful. You know, it's like it grabs people's. I like image power. You know, I want the image to, you know, just affect people.
Yeah, it's like that poster language, comic language.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be, in some ways, garish, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's born out of.
Yeah.
I actually never somehow heard of this Oscar Schlemmer.
Yeah, you should look him up.
I'm about to go deep into that right now.
Yeah. He's great. I actually read his, well, this is a little creepy, but they, you know, I don't, like, he had his, I guess his wife had his diary, you know, his letters and writings published. So I read his collected letters and diaries. Kind of a tragic story. He died at the end of, right before World War II ended, but he kind of was forced to stop making art by the Nazis because he was part of the Bauhaus group, and he kept having to, like, you know, leave Berlin because, you know, there's a lot of political pressure on all those artists, and
it's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, people can't even comprehend that kind of shit.
It's fucking crazy.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And then to almost make it, it's just
yeah.
Well, on that note, it's good talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great.
And do you mind plugging your various? Well, quick question: does RisoLAB, like, do you print works? No,
we do not.
Right.
We offer classes. We have classes open to the public. So RisoLAB, it's the Riso studio that I co-founded and that I run at the School of Visual Arts, and I teach a zine class there. We also have classes, and that one's open to the public. It's a continuing education class. I also teach an undergrad class there that's only for SVA students. But we have 5 different continuing ed classes. We've got a artist book class taught by Aidan Fitzgerald, who is the founder of Cold Cue Press, who just moved out from Seattle about a year ago. We got a comics class taught by Ren McDonald. And there's another class taught by Andy Alexander, who just launched Cram Books. He's a great cartoonist and artist. Teaches a drawing-based class. So that's the space I run, and I teach there. I run the space. You know, I'm there on and off, like, throughout the week. And you can also follow my work at on Instagram at _PPPANNN_ and also Megapress at MEGAPRESS. And also, you know, I've got, you know, you can find links to websites for Megapress where you can find all the zines and prints and everything that we have. You can order through our website, or also a lot of our distributors have our work. And yeah, I guess that those are all the different places. My own studio practice, Megapress, which is like a broader platform where I publish other people too, and then the Riso space that I run at SVA.
All right.
So.
Well, good talking to you, and we should catch up sometime.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. Next up, we have Bill McWright. See you then.